Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Conversations with a Vet. My name is Carol Lee. We have a wonderful guest waiting in the wings. He is a Navy veteran with multiple combat tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, Africa, South America, as well as Iceland. And so he will be on here in just a couple minutes. I did want to go over a couple things. I wanted to give a shout out to Aegis Gun Care. So they graciously donated this for the next milestone, which is 1,000 subscribers. So really excited for that. I also do have a couple of books by Frank DeMeth. They are autographed. It is his second book in his series, and he's hoping to have 7 of those. And it is Defending the Eagle. So you can go out, you can pretty much find that anywhere. So really excited for those. So without further ado, let's go ahead and welcome my guest, Bill Harris. How are you?
Good evening. I am better than I deserve to be. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on and telling your story. So I always kind of start the channel out. Ask about who my guest is as a child. So Bill, tell me who you were as a child.
I mean, for me, that's easy. I'm probably very similar to the same person I am now. Anybody that would spend time with me would probably say that. Sports. I grew up in New York City. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I grew up son of a firefighter.
Okay.
I turned out to be a medic, so there's probably a little bit of connectivity there. But I've got 2 siblings. I got a brother and a sister who's now deceased. But most of what I think back of growing up, we were outside all. I mean, obviously things are different now anyway, based on the gray hair you can see. We didn't have, we didn't have the things that our kids currently have growing up. So my childhood is, all I think about is being in the street, playing football, playing wiffle ball, playing.
Yeah.
Like it was just sports, and you're in from the moment we woke up until it got dark, and then we were angry we had to go in and eat, and then
Right.
eat as fast as you can and run back outside and drink from the hose, and so
all those things that made us who we are today. So were you?
So that's good.
Were you studious in school?
I was not. It's funny. I was, I can think back even when I had to read books or do book reports, they would be about Gordie Howe or they would be about something sports related. It was funny. Like when I watched my kids struggle in school, recognizing now that I just associated it with not being intelligent, right? Boys and girls are different. But I've got a touch, more than a touch probably, of ADHD and the ability to try to sit still in one spot for prolonged periods of time. And, now looking back, I've learned to become a better student because I learned what works for me.
Yeah.
And I think everybody learns differently, right? That metacognition of recognizing what works for you and what doesn't.
Exactly right.
It took many years to get there for me, you know what I mean? And so it's just a lot of, and looking back, you asked about childhood, and I mentioned my dad already. And my dad, I'm the oldest. My dad and I were very, very similar. A lot of people can probably resonate with this. And wow, somebody's happy. And sorry,
That's okay.
Children actually outside playing and riding bicycles. So
nice. But you can't complain about that.
No, actually, but I think my dad saw a lot of himself in me and knew the path would be troublesome for me, and I think that frustrated him, and I think he didn't know how to handle it. And I think, so the conversations in terms of school were always, you're smarter and you're probably not applying yourself. And I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't. It was tough. It was tough to sit in one spot, tough to not, to focus on things that that don't excite you or don't light you on fire. And, I've learned now I'm an educator, and now I value the process of it, and I love learning, but I also know when I am in an academic setting, I have to be very deliberate about how I learn. I've learned what works for me. Right. It took many years to get there. I spent many a half a summer not playing sports, and that's it. You're punished. You're not going out all summer. And the plan then was to drive my mother crazy to the point where she was like, just get out of the house, just go.
Right. And back in that day, it was
Yeah.
really a punishment when you couldn't go outside.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah. Now
so
I don't, my kids, the punishment is to kick them outside. Now it's the opposite.
exactly. Get them
Yeah,
out, get them off of the TV, get them off of the video games.
Yeah.
So speaking of
I always
sports,
say the longest walk ever was the 3 or 4 blocks from elementary school home, carrying that report card at the end of the year, knowing this is not.
yeah. And now everything is electronic, right? So most of it is you can go online. The parents go online and take a look
Yeah,
at it.
you can't fudge that. I don't think you can't pencil whip that. Yeah, you
Right?
can't pencil
I
whip that or
know.
hide that. They have it before you get home now.
That's exactly right. So, okay. As far as sports goes, were you studious? Or I already asked you that. Sorry, I just got sidetracked. Joe Bird, welcome. Thank you for jumping in. Okay, so did you liked sports? What did you play in high school then? Football?
Football and baseball.
Football and baseball?
I grew up.
You're kind of breaking up on me,
Yeah,
Bill.
and I grew up in New York City, and you know what I mean. Like I excelled in. Okay, sorry. How about now? My internet. I can move if it's not working. Can you hear me now, Carolee? Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I played football in high school. I wouldn't say I excelled, especially in New York City. The schools were just so big. I laugh. I play basketball. In fact, I played with the kids today, and they were like, "You're really good, Dad. Did you play in high school?" And I was like, "If you weren't 6'5" in New York City and dunking, you did not play high school basketball at my school. No, it's the sheer size of the schools and the sheer. I was a late bloomer. I was real small, real puny.
Yeah.
I think I had an aptitude. I think I'm very athletic, but I also think I probably didn't have the genetics for it size wise. I didn't have, and also now it's odd because kids tend to specialize. I look at my kids are hockey players. They focus pretty much solely on one sport pretty early on. They've had a lot of private coaching. And I don't know whether that's the best way to go or whether it's not, but like for me, I was never focused on one thing. It was play everything. Play wiffle ball, play roller hockey, play football, play baseball, play lacrosse, play whatever. So.
Right. So at what point did you decide that you wanted to join the military?
For me, it's interesting, right? Everybody has some semblance of a call to serve, I would say. But for me, it's interesting. My dad was in the Navy for about 4 years. It wasn't that I was just trying to follow in his footsteps, but when I was about 17, he was a plank owner on the USS America, and he saw that the America was coming to New York City, and so he wanted to go see the ship. And he's being a plank owner when it's commissioned, it's kind of a big deal. So he took us all, and I remember at 17 going and seeing the ship, and it was cool and all, but the story's not going where you think it is. Where, oh, this is awesome, and I think I want to do this. It was the exact opposite. I looked around at those guys and I was like, I will never do this. This is absolutely not for me. You can have this. And I wound up joining at the age of about 21. I met my wife very young, and I was married and had a stepson when I joined. So honestly, for me, it was more about stability. It was for somebody who had, a minimal amount of college. It just made sense. And then the thought of serving obviously was appealing to me. So it just was a sensible thing. We lived in Pennsylvania at the time. I was struggling doing construction, and at that point I'd taken on responsibilities, and I was like, hey, this might be a tough go in the beginning, but ultimately, in talking to people who were smarter than me, said, hey, listen, you got a wife and child to take care of. This might be something you might want to look at. At a minimum, you get yourself a skill set and certainly grow up a little bit, see the world potentially, and then decide whether it's for you or not. So,
specifically the Navy, did you think back to the fact that, you saw them when you were 17 and?
No, I went to the Air Force first. And they told me, because it all tends to be very cyclical and it's the needs of the services. My father-in-law was Air Force. And I don't know if now looking back, if there was anything particularly more appealing about one versus the other. The thing that became unappealing to me about that was just they were like, okay, we can see you in a year. Come back in a year. And then when I went to the Navy recruiter, he was like, what are you thinking? And I'm like, well, it's Tuesday. Can you have me in by Friday? I got bills to pay. So I was, my recruiter kept blowing me off. And when I went back to see him after boot camp, I finally questioned him. I'm like, hey man, I was knocking your door down to get in here and you were kind of blowing me off. What's that about? And then he said, well, I'd already met my quota for the month. And I said, well, why don't you just tell me that? And he's like, well, I'm not allowed to tell you that, so he, and I guess it's just a numbers game, right?
Right.
If I was that hell bent on getting in on the 26th of the month, I was going to be that hell bent on the 1st of the month. So, which proved to be true. So I think it was more just, it wasn't that the Navy was more appealing to me one over the other. In the process, my dad helped. He spoke Navy. And so when it was time to go down to MEPS and it was time to at least have discussions about what jobs would you like, he had at least a clearer understanding of, the acronyms and all of the stuff that, now looking back was so confusing. Or, you watch a little sizzle reel, or back then there wasn't even video. You read a one paragraph and that's the description. Choose your job.
And what did you choose?
I choose to be a hospital corpsman. I choose to be a medic.
Excellent.
And they were, at the time, I had scored pretty well on my tests, and they were dangling a lot of carrots for me to go into like a nuclear field and be submarine based, which to me all seemed appealing. But what was appealing about it was, you'll come in as an E5 and we'll give you this massive signing bonus. And I think my dad knew enough about the military. If they're dangling that many carrots, he's like, I know you're a smart guy and all. And he's like, there's some value there. He's like, but I don't know that I'd be writing you a $10,000 check right from get-go. He's like, you may want to look into what the job's going to actually entail.
Right. Exactly right.
And the other thing he looked at it, he said, you don't know whether this is going to be something you'll do forever or just for a few years. Whatever you do, the best thing I can tell you is pick something that's marketable for when you do get out of service. And he did the exact opposite. Yeah. And he didn't do that. He was a weatherman. And I remember thinking at one point, like, what, a weatherman in the Navy's an aerographer. And I said, what possessed you to want to be a weatherman? Did you have, fascinations with the weather? He's like, no. He's like, the school was the closest to home. I was dating your mom at the time. And I 100% made that decision based on the geography of the school. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense.
That works.
How do you argue that? Yeah. So.
Oh, wow. So, tell me about what it was like when you got to boot camp, like that moment that you stepped off that bus or what have you. What was that like for you?
There were some interesting things about my boot camp. Now looking back, the assumption is we all had the same experience, and to some extent we did, but to some extent it was different. You have company commanders that lead you through the boot camp process that are your babysitters essentially, and their promotions and their evaluations are based on your success as a company, their ability to get you through, and the awards and all those other things. But we had two of them. One of them got promoted to chief during our boot camp and was going through the initiation process, so we didn't see a lot of him. The other one was an E5, which I think is the minimal rank you can be to be a company commander. And he was absolutely, now looking back, he was certifiably crazy. So there's obviously a little bit of shock and awe. You get off the bus and they're yelling at you and the bedlam of it, and you haven't slept and you don't know what to expect. So, all of that, you kind of knew that was coming. You knew you were going to get your head shaved. You knew you were going to get woken up early. So none of those things were a surprise. But I remember I was in Great Lakes, Illinois in the wintertime. It's cold, it's snowy. And I remember them marching us from whatever building we were in, to where we were going to go to the, the permanent side of, where the boot camp actually was. And we didn't know how to march. We didn't know how to do anything.
Right.
And I remember like the company commander yelling, like screaming. And then I remember him picking up what some would call a snowball, but it was ice, and hitting one of the other recruits like in the face with it. It was like 2 feet away from me. And I was like, oh, we're definitely not playing now. I don't even know how I'm supposed to march, but I'm going to make sure whatever he's yelling to do, I'm not taking an ice ball in the face anytime soon. He was a pretty good sized guy. And he now looking back, clearly, like, it was abusive behavior. Like he hit kids. We had guns back then. Like we had rifles in boot camp, and which they don't do anymore. And you had to memorize a 16 count manual at arms. And I remember him breaking a rifle over the back of a recruit. like,
No.
oh yeah, there was a lot of physical,
Oh my
yeah.
goodness.
So, so it was, you asked if it was shocking. It was a little bit shocking. It was a little bit like, what am I signed up for here?
Right. Yeah.
It was,
When you stepped on those footprints, though, did you feel like the sense of history before you, or were you just like, I hope I can get through this day?
yeah, I think more that. Yeah, I don't think you feel the nobility of service, or the, maybe some folks did, or can feel like all of the things that it's going to lead to. I think it's just more, not even get through the next day, right? Like, I spend time in the SEAL teams, and those guys talk a lot about buds. It's just get through the next evolution, right?
Right.
Like
Day
what's
by
the next
day
thing? Make it to the next meal. Make it to the next
Yep.
thing. Just,
Yeah.
my biggest takeaway from boot camp, and obviously I was young. I was 21 years old. I was married. But from a maturity standpoint, I understood later on. What I didn't understand then is why is there another grown man in my face screaming and yelling because my underwear aren't folded a certain way. And that didn't make a lot of sense to me until it was broken down to me. Well, if you can't be trusted to fold underwear, how could we ever trust you with a $6 million engine on an aircraft, or with an aircraft carrier, or with, whatever else that has an inherent amount of a rifle that has the ability to take someone's life, right? Or narcotics in the case of a medic that you need to be accountable for, right? Well, it makes a lot more sense when you say it like that, right?
It does. It's being able to follow direction.
Yeah.
And the taking responsibility for what you do. And I think that's great that you brought that up.
And the other big boot camp memory I have is now having talked to the other, so many other service members, is it sounds like most of their experience it was tough-ish, and harder whenever their babysitters were around, but it was a job, and those guys went home. In my boot camp experience, we had an older guy who they made like a master at arms, and he just narked on us, and we got beaten for it, or we got punished for it. So we were like in bed exactly when the lights went out. There was no sneaking in and getting soda machines or writing letters or reading books. Or I talked to everybody else. I was like, wow, your experience was way different than ours. They snuck out of their barracks and did all kinds of stuff. Like, we didn't do anything, because if you did anything, like, somebody told on you and then you just paid for it. So it was a rough few weeks of months, whatever it was now. We did. And the other big thing I remember was we had snow watch, because it was Waukegan, Illinois in the winter. And so you'd have a 2-hour, whatever it was, snow watch, at midnight to 2 a.m. And so the first time I had snow watch, they were like, okay, you got a partner, because you don't do anything by yourself. Obviously, you have a buddy. And we went outside. There's a big pile of snow, and I mean big by Chicago standard or Illinois standards. And they were like, hey, move that big pile over there. And so you just shoveled snow for 2 hours and put a minimal dent in the pile. And then I had snow watch 2 nights later, and then it was just move the pile from where we moved it back to the other spot. So it was just, I was like, we were working really hard to move the pile. That was not the intentionality behind this. It was to get used to having to work and have responsibility. Too. And it did keep you warm.
Yeah.
But yeah. Snow watch.
That's interesting. So for graduation, you graduate, and what were you feeling at that point?
Yeah, that's an interesting time, because now you're getting ready to really find out at least a little bit more of what service is, and you still have to go to A school from there, but you definitely take pride in it. You definitely take. My family came, and then we got to go to Chicago and see the Sears Tower, and
nice.
It's funny in those things, like my wife makes fun of me for at times not being as present as I could have or should have been, right? Like, can you take off and go to his kindergarten graduation? He's graduating kindergarten. Is it that big a deal? We've all done it. Like, you look back, like, it was a big deal, the boot camp graduation was a big deal. I saw a video not that long ago of a guy saying all of the things back then that we thought we were too cool for, like the boot camp pictures and I regret not participating in those things more. I regret not keeping those things. I regret not all those things to me that at the time seemed a little bit silly. Like, I wish I had more of those things. I wish I would have held on to a little more of those things. I wish I would have been a little more present. And I think back then you're just so excited about getting to the get to that you don't really focus on enjoy where you're at. Like, you know what I mean? You don't have an enormous amount of responsibility. Somebody's telling you what color socks to wear and where to stand. And, all you got to do is just that.
And just be in that moment. Absolutely. So okay, you've gone through graduation, and then you end up going, you go to a school. And where was that for you?
That was in same place in Waukegan,
Okay.
Illinois. And at that point, it had warmed up a little. And I think I got to go home for a couple of weeks. I was on like a HARP duty, so you get a couple of weeks home. And I'm so bad. My memory is so, I've been blown up a couple of times, so my brain is like, you know what I mean? Like piecing it together gets hard
Yeah.
sometimes. And
Yeah.
I think some people have great memories and some people don't. So I don't
I
even
am
remember how
not
many.
one of them.
Yeah, I don't remember. Like I didn't.
And
Oh
I
my gosh,
don't
I
have
remember.
your
They remember the
excuse.
day they graduated boot camp, and I'm like, the date? I'm like, I have no idea what date that was. Like, but core school was different because you start getting responsibility. Eventually, you're on your civilian clothes. You have friends. You know, it's not a boot camp experience, and you start learning medicine. You know, and in that, I was a better student. I was a better, you know, I started learning the history of our rate. Hospital Corps is the only all enlisted corps in any service. Hospital Corps as a group, we have more Medal of Honor winners than any other corps group. Now, granted, a lot of that was in service with the Marine Corps, and a lot of that was Vietnam based. But now, after 20 years of GWAT and OIF and OEF, you know, certainly the Hospital Corps has also, you know, we've you know, shown up and have sacrificed and have lost and have also been awarded a fair amount of things. So, you know,
Right.
so I look back at those times and starting to learn the basics, you know, and anytime in medicine and probably in any trade, you know, they teach you this much and the expectation is that you're supposed to know that much. You know,
Right.
and most of that you're going to get OJT and you're going to get through experience. But I remember starting to learn what the job I had signed up for was going to be, and that, especially if you're going to serve in a Greenside Marine Corps unit, how much responsibility was going to be on me. And so you really wanted to start at least, you know, like, hey, let's have fun here with your friends or whatever, but know that somebody's life may be left in your hands at some point. You might want to start taking notes.
Right. Exactly. And so you get through core school. Where do you go from there?
Yeah, I graduated. I think I graduated second in my class, and I had a lot of choices.
Nice.
And I picked Portsmouth, Virginia. You know, and again, the conversation was in conjunction with my wife. We'd grown up on the East Coast. We had been to Virginia Beach before, so it was a place we knew. So it seemed safe. And then right when I got to the hospital was right during the beginning of the Gulf War.
Hmm.
And that hospital had been tapped to take a large number of people out of the hospital.
Oh,
So they were super understaffed when I got there. So we were supposed to go through like a 6 or 8 week OJT, and they condensed it down to like 2 weeks. They gave you, hey, good enough. And initially, I think I was working like 12-hour shifts, like 4 days on, 1 day off, 3 days on. Like it was a lot of work, and it was not the norm because we were just super short staffed because so many people had, you know, gone over to the Gulf. And then eventually, after like 3 or 4 months of that, I think a large pool of military reservists got activated and plussed up our numbers. So now
yeah.
I remember that, and I also remember more and more people getting tagged to go, and they would be so frustrated or angry or disappointed, and I was like, I'll take your place. You know, I kept asking, like, this is what I joined for. I didn't, you know, I was working in a pediatric ward. I was taking care of infants and changing diapers, and you know, it was mostly babies that had asthma and small kids that had fevers that were inexplicable. You know, and again, it was a great chance to learn, but it wasn't, you know, like that wasn't the vision I had. I wanted to be a combat medic. I wanted to be with Marines. I wanted, you know, I want to jump out of airplanes and go do cool stuff. And this didn't feel at all like that.
But I'm sure your wife was very happy.
Yeah, for the most part. It was, I'll tell you, you talk about being present. I'll tell you the one thing that I did learn from that experience, you know, not every kid was just minimally sick and went home after 2 days. There were some really, really heavy things. And it was the first time I started experiencing death as part of work. And I remembered, being young and naive, but I remember being smart enough to say to myself, hey, some of the things that you're witnessing are really important and heavy things. And there are going to come times in your life when you think you've got it bad. You need to reflect and think back on these things and recognize. I remember vividly, 8-year-old girl having her leg amputated, cancer. and waking up, and her first concern was, not about her leg, not about how the surgery went, but are my parents okay? Like that level of courage. And then
Yeah.
I remember young doctors, young lieutenants, they're still learning how to be doctors, having to go in a room and tell two other young parents that that your child has some kind of a horrendous condition or something that's, potentially cancer or something along those lines. And I remember to myself saying, like, I don't know that I could do that. I don't, like the heaviness of that,
Right.
or taking
Exactly.
care of abused kids. Right now, you're shepherding over them, and you have to watch the system play out and watch the, what I mean. There's a lot of heavy things that, for somebody who's young and hadn't been exposed to those things. I knew I needed to pay attention to those things, and I needed to make sure, as somebody with a bad memory, these are certain things you should never forget, because
Right.
there's a lot of life lessons in this. Like, then go
Yeah.
home and look at your kids a little differently.
How long were you stationed there before you moved on?
So I think back then we do 18 months, which isn't a lot, and you go right to shore duty because it's probably the safest place to put you in a hospital where you can learn, and be mentored. And I think I did the pediatric. I kept putting in request after request to go to the Gulf War, and they kept telling me no. They kept telling me no, and then eventually I got called up to see the command master chief, and he hands me a stack of these chits, and he's like, what is this? And at that time I wasn't a green side corpsman. I hadn't been through field med school. And so he's like, all of these deployments are to go with the Marines. You're not qualified to do that. I'm like, well, I requested to go to that school and you told me no. He's like, I didn't tell you no. The Navy told you no. And so he's like, you got to stop putting these chits in, and he's like, you're not qualified to go, and you're where you're supposed to be right now, which in fairness is true. And then to his credit, he just recognized I probably wasn't happy with where I was. And he's like, what if I send you somewhere else? He's like, where are you working? And I told him, he's like, well, what if I send you to EMT school? And then I put you to work in the emergency room, which was such a blessing. And then again, great leadership, recognizing that, like, he talked to my leadership. He knew I was a hard worker. He knew I was in it for the right reasons. And so, in that 18 months, the last probably 6 or 8 months of it, I got to do a little more of what I deemed to be a little more exciting, and certainly started laying the groundwork for what would pay dividends later on.
Yeah. Which is good. So then from there, what did you do?
So from there, what was funny is all the guys and gals that were the same rank as me were starting to pick their next duty station. And a lot of them were picking sea schools. A lot of them were picking, it's a seashore rotation. And at that point, you're supposed to go to sea. And a lot of them were so terrified of going to sea. I could see that they were picking anything just to not do that. And they're like, I'm going to go to lab school. I'm like, do you have any desire to be a lab technician? No. And I'm like, why are you doing that? Well, I don't want to go to sea. And I was like, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Sea may be hard, but first off, at that point, it was only going to be 2 years. And this is where the process of talking to a detailer and then figuring out what your next job is. I did that multiple times throughout my career, and never what we had discussed is really whatever happened.
Why am I not surprised?
Yeah, I didn't know that at the time. So everybody talks about being bamboozled by the recruiter. My recruiter was 100% honest with me. I was never bamboozled by him. It was typically my detailer for the most part. So I negotiated orders to go on, I don't even remember now, an aircraft carrier that was going to be just commissioned. So I would have been a plank owner. We were going to go on a world cruise. I was like, oh, this would be great. And I'm like, it's only 2 years. I could stand on my head and juggle for 2 years. So I was like, I was embracing it. At that point, I was an E3. I'm like, whatever. I joined the Navy. Like, running away from ship and running away from the sea didn't sound sensible to me. So that's what I verbally agreed to. And then my orders showed up, a few months later, and I look at them and they go, USS Nassau, LHA-4. I'm like, that's not the aircraft carrier at all that we had talked about. I went to the same command master chief and said, hey, this is what I have. What does this mean? And he's like, oh, that's an amphibious ship. It transports Marines. You said you wanted to be with Marines. And he's like, it's very big. It's almost the size of a carrier. He said all the things he needed to say. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll go there. And then, so that was the next duty station was a ship based out of Norfolk. So again, I didn't have to move my family. We could stay in the same house we were in.
Which is really good.
Yeah, which is a big deal. And that's another thing for me. I was very fortunate in the job I picked. I was gone a lot. I deployed a lot, but they never really had to bop around and live in multiple different places, or they didn't.
So what was it like for you then? So you get involved with the Marine Corps. What was it like for you having to be put with a bunch of Marines?
They were, and even at that point, they're not on the ship. They're really only on the ship when you deploy or when you go out and do certain exercises pre-deployment. So I still wasn't really where I ultimately wanted to be. But at least on the ship, there's independence. And on the ship, there's an enormous amount of work. It's really hard to explain to anybody who's never been on a ship. It's 18-hour work days, and it would take 27 hours to get the amount of work you get done. And it's hard to put that into words to people. They can't wrap their head around, well, what are you doing all day? You're just floating around doing nothing. And the job that you have obviously dictates some of that. But first off, you're taking care of people who are injured and sick. We live in close proximity to one another. You have an enormous amount of responsibility for the health and welfare of people. And you have a ton of programs, immunizations, you have hearing, you have lead, you have all these other things. So from a preventive medicine standpoint, that you're taking care of 3,000 people on a ship. You know what I mean? So just keeping their immunizations current, keeping their dental current, keeping them sick, keeping them in the fight is a full-time job. And then the other thing that I didn't know is like just cleaning. The cleaning and the cleanliness and that was probably the toughest part. I loathed it. Like I felt like all I did, especially when you're new there and you're low ranking, I was either painting something or cleaning a toilet or washing something. I loved the medicine when I got to practice medicine and learn medicine and be tutelaged by other sailors who were ahead of me. I loved that part. I love taking care of people. I get to do stitches. I get to do this. That was cool. But for every hour of that, it felt like there were 5 hours of mopping something or cleaning something or scrubbing something. And I was like, this is not what I want to do with my life.
And so when that time was up, where did you go from there?
Again, another great bamboozle, you're going to do this for 2 years. At the 18-month mark, when it was time for me to call them and go, hey, what am I doing next? He's like, oh, no, shipmate, your seashore rotation has changed. It's now 3 years. So call me back in a year. And I was like, oh, cool. Maybe I should have been a lab tech. Right?
Maybe they really knew what they were doing.
Yeah, exactly. Now I see why you avoided this. It's hard. And what's interesting is that last year, now looking back retrospectively, was the toughest year in the Navy for me. We were in the shipyard. We went from a 6-section or 8-section duty to a 3-section duty. So you're living on the ship every 3 days. You have to do your own rehabilitation. So you're rebuilding your entire workspace. And we had a very large medical workspace. There were a lot of corpsmen on the ship. The medical department was very big. It was robust. So if you're an air traffic controller and you're in the shipyard, you're not taking any aircraft on. You're not doing any air traffic controlling. If you're a medic, if you're a corpsman, you're still seeing sick call. You're still taking care of people. And now we have shipyard workers on board. We're doing lots of heavy industrial dangerous work. So more people are getting hurt. So on top of having to do rehab work, painting things, ripping up floors, and doing all of those things, you're also taking care of way more people. So that year was tough, but it was an extra year. And again, now looking back, it wasn't so tough because it's in the past.
Exactly right. And so at what point then did you get to leave then and go to a different duty station after the 3 years?
I did. I negotiated orders again, and then my orders were going to be to Naval Air Station Oceana, which was 5 minutes from where I lived. And at the time, driving from Virginia Beach to Norfolk was horrendous. Now it's only half horrendous, semi-horrendous from a traffic perspective. So I'd have to leave at like 4 a.m, and then I have to stay later. So I was like 5 minutes from work. That's dynamite. So I took orders to Naval Air Station Oceana. It was going to be shore duty. In fact, Chris, that you had on as a guest, that's the first place I met him. I was an E5 at that point. And then my orders came, and my orders said, VFW, some aviation squadron. I'm like, that's not NAS Oceana. And again, I went right to a career counselor and I said, hey, what is this? And he made a phone call and he's like, yeah, you're going to work at the clinic, but you'll have responsibilities to this squadron. And it was a jet squadron, a fighter pilot squadron. That's considered a RAG squadron. And it wound up being a blessing, to be honest. I worked at the clinic full time and I had some squadron responsibilities. And really all that added up to is if you were smart, you could tell the clinic you were doing squadron things and the squadron you were doing clinic things, and you could find a way to kind of skate in that happy ground in the middle. And, it was, looking back, like it was pretty cool. Like I got to do a couple things. The squadron went out once or twice a year. It wasn't a heavy lift. Being at sea on a ship for 2 weeks is nothing after you've been on it for 3 years. So,
right. Right.
And I went to the clinic, and that clinic was a great experience for me. Chris and I bonded. We played softball together. Chris and I were both E5s there. And if you look typically at the way the Navy is set up, E6s generally are some of the hardest working people in the Navy because they're really pressing hard to make chief.
Right.
And when we got there, the E6s at that clinic, they just weren't strong E6s. And so Chris and I just gobbled up all of the responsibility and all of these big, really important collateral duties and jobs. And it was a chance to really start like learning leadership and taking care of people and taking ownership of other things more than just your day-to-day job, because up until that point, especially in shore duty, it can very much feel less like service and more like an 8-hour job. You go in, you take your x-rays, you go home, So it was a great opportunity for me to start, doing the things and laying the groundwork that was going to lead to promotions and to success and leadership and other things.
Yeah. So what was your next adventure then?
So yeah, my next adventure there, I left that early. I terminated that early. I determined that I wanted to go to independent duty corps school. I wanted to be an IDC. That was for us in our rating. There are lots of sub ratings. To me, that felt like the pinnacle because it's essentially, before the PA program was even really resurrected, essentially you're a PA. You have clinical rights. You're seeing patients. You're writing prescriptions. You're ordering x-rays. You're consulting out. And I knew from my time on the ship when I worked at sick call, like I had a good clinical acumen. I was good at that. I was good at seeing patients. I was good at evaluating and diagnosing, even though that we're not allowed to diagnose, right? I can guess.
Right.
So I'm
thinking.
Yeah. So I pushed, what's your assessment? So I had pushed, and again, now looking back, I look back at some of the decisions I made and I'm like, I don't know what I was thinking, but that school's a year long or 13 months long. And at the time it was in two places. It was in beautiful sunny San Diego and it was in Portsmouth, Virginia. And the school in Portsmouth was getting ready to close. So I was pushing really hard to get in the last class in Portsmouth so that I didn't have to go to San Diego. And now looking back, I'm like, what is wrong with you? And we wound up moving to Southern California after I retired. And I'm like, it's beautiful. Like, I don't know why I terminated shore to get in, and again, now looking back, it worked out the way it was supposed. I was where I was supposed to be.
Right.
And so I left there. I finally got a chance because you can't go to any school. They had changed the rules. You can't go to any school without going to Marine Corps training. So I finally got to go to my Marine Corps field med school down at Camp Johnson. I was an E5 in August, so you get to go to that, Camp Johnson, Camp Lejeune experience in August. Mosquitoes, the national bird, and the satellite dish was the state flower. And it was,
right.
Marching through swamps, and it was, and again, but it was great. I absolutely loved the Marine Corps. I loved the time I got to spend. And it felt like that's the whole reason I came was for this. Yeah. So that was, to answer your earlier question about what it was like to finally get it. And a big part of that school is some of the field medicine, but it's really more of the learning how to be a Marine, right? Learning what the Marine Corps history is about, learning why that service is different and what sets it apart and what, and I loved all of it. And I was good at that stuff. I was good at marching. I was good at the PT. I was good at making my uniform impeccable. And, I liked a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. And we have 2 Marine veterans.
Hoorah.
So, so definitely. And that's always one of the questions when my oldest Marine is on and is, did you ever get to, serve beside Marine Corps? So, yeah. So, okay, from there, what was your training time? Like, how long were you there?
I think Camp Johnson's like 8 weeks or 10 weeks. And then I graduated and then immediately went right to independent duty school. And that was a year. And that was full on clinical. And I look back at that because we talked about, started with me and education. I was super active in softball. And I was super active in hockey. I was coaching hockey teams. I was playing on hockey. That was back when inline hockey was very big. And I knew that this was my career. And I had told friends, and my wife was helpful and supportive, and that, hey, listen, I'm getting ready to go to school. The success of my career is incumbent upon this. So I distanced myself and created space from all of those things, and that lasted all of about a month. Because I was like, listen, what I mean? Like, I love this, and I wound up being very good at school, and I wound up. Because at that point I had learned what worked for me, what my study habits were, and what, how I learned what, and I'm still very good friends with a classmate of mine, and he talks about it all the time. He's like, bro, you slept for 13 months and was second in the class. He's like, I hated you. He's like, you take my class flashcards and look at them for 15 minutes and then get a 97. And I just had a really good memory at that time. And I knew at that point, like I was really good at taking the chapter and figuring out what's important here. What do I need to know? Like what's not
Right.
gonna,
Exactly.
and I not only that, but for the first time ever from an educational perspective, I was really interested in what they were teaching us. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot easier to be studious when what you're learning about is interesting to you, and so,
Right. Exactly.
and so it was great. And I remember that my instructors would wake me up, and then by like the third or fourth week, they gave up. He's like, he's scoring 97s on the test. Just let him sleep. Whatever he's doing is working. Like we're good. Like, don't disturb him. They would get up and leave. The whole class would leave and see if I would hear it. And I had this weird brain thing where I would, like, if he would stop talking, I would immediately wake up. So then they figured out they could empty the room and go to lunch as long as he kept talking. And then if he'd wake me up, I could recite back what he was saying. So I think I was like listening somehow. But yeah, it's very bizarre.
Interesting.
Yeah, and and so I think I was like, because they would joke. They were like, you put your head on the book and you're learning this through osmosis. I'm like, no, I'm kind of listening to him. I'm just exhausted. I don't know.
That's funny.
Yeah, it was very bizarre.
So from there, where do you go?
From there, you get to pick your orders based on your graduate. I think I'm a bridesmaid. I graduated second again, and I wound up choosing to go to Iceland. We collectively made that decision because we had a son in high school, and I went unaccompanied. And that was one of the places I could go for the shortest period of time, and he could stay. And then the interesting part of that, it was all of those, all of that shell game of moving things around and deciding to go without my wife. That only lasted a few months, and my son got accepted to go to a hockey program, and he wound up going to high school in Canada. So
Wow.
So the not taking your family or not moving so that he could graduate from the same high school didn't play out anyway. But Iceland was great. It was only an 18-month tour. I came home 3 or 4 times in that time frame on leave. I was brand new as an IDC. It was a great place to go. It was a great duty station to go. In fact, Joe Bird, who was on earlier, and he was at the schoolhouse when I was there, and he came to Iceland, and we worked together. But it was a great place to go from a clinical standpoint. I knew I needed to learn how to see patients and how to be a clinician. And I worked in a hallway with 5 general practitioners. So I could,
oh, wow.
And they were phenomenal. They let me see whatever I wanted to see and treat whatever I wanted to see. And I had also shown to them that I was never going to do something. If I felt unsure about it, I had no problem walking in and knocking on a door to somebody and going, hey, doc, can you look at this? What do you think this is? What you'll learn later on about the relationship between medics or corpsmen and doctors is there's a lot of doctors who think they're medics, and there's a lot of medics who think they're doctors. And the better ones in both of those communities are the ones who recognize the skill sets in both and work through some of that. So I was confident and comfortable, but I was never so cavalier that I wasn't willing to just go get help or ask, especially when someone else's health was at stake. So it was a great place to really learn. And the doctors who were there were really good about taking us under their wing. And I remember my first day there, they put up an x-ray, and he's like, what do you think? And I'm like, looks like an x-ray. And he's like, yeah, but what do you see? And I'm like, I just came through 13 months of school. They didn't teach us how to read x-rays. Right. So again, his expectation of me was completely different than what the training was. And he was like, I just assumed. And I was like, so I'm here to learn. You tell me what I should be looking at. Like if there's a big crack in it, I'll see that. But outside of that, I have no idea. And so it was, it was the beginning of a really good relationship of him. There were a couple of them that stuck out in particular, them leaning in and figuring out, how much we did know and how much we needed to know and, what their job was to get us to where we needed to go. And again, all not being able to see what was coming down the road, 10 years of armed conflict. Like, the fact that those guys poured into us when they could paid dividends down the road.
Right. And your next stop?
Then I finally got to go be with Marines. And there were Marines in Iceland, and I supported them, and I spent a lot of time with them, went to Norway with them. And the hospital knew that I had a strong penchant to do that, so that I was the Marine liaison. So I did get to do some of that there. It just wasn't my full-time job. I left there, and I went back to Norfolk to Marine Corps Security Forces Battalion, which is headquartered in Norfolk, and they own the FAST company teams, Fleet Anti-Terrorism Security teams. And I was an E6 I was an E6 in Iceland. I was an E6 when I graduated from school. And I was the senior medical guy. And we had a chief. It was a very weird dynamic because we had a chief. So technically he was the senior guy, but he wasn't an independent duty corpsman. So for those guys to be able to do immunizations or see sick call or do any of those things, I had to be the overseer of that because oddly we didn't have a physician. And it was a great duty station for me to then continue to hone the craft of the clinical piece, but it really was more leadership. Now I'm responsible for getting corpsmen ready and making sure that, and learning more about the Marine Corps, especially then when it was still peacetime pre 9/11. I was there during 9/11, but kind of educating Marine Corps leadership on what they thought a good corpsman was. Right? They thought a good corpsman was a guy who could run, or a guy who looked great in uniform and got along great with the Marines. And while those things matter, the same corpsman that they'd fight for, they're like, hey, I really want to take this guy. And I'm like, well, why do you want to take him? And he's like, well, he looks great in uniform, doc, and he out PT'd, he could shoot. I'm like, cool. Do you know that I had to just counsel him because he gave 5 of the wrong shots, or he didn't, so the same guy who may have to keep your Marines alive clinically is not doing the work on the medical side. So, so it was a great chance to, to shift and start learning about being an educator and start focusing a little less on what do I need to do to be ready, as opposed to what do I need to do to get them ready.
Right.
And moving into that. That was, it was great. And to be in a full-time Marine Corps command. And when we're at a Marine Corps unit as Navy, when you check in, you have the option whether you want to go Marine Corps regulations or not. And if that's the case, you run their PFT and you abide by their uniform standards. And I chose to do that at every Marine Corps unit I've ever been with. And most people don't do that by the time they're E6 and above, because then you can grow your hair a little longer and drive gunny or first sergeant crazy and a little bit of stick it to them. But for me, that never made sense. I'm like, if I said I wanted to be a part of this unit, why would I not do all of the things that the unit does? Right. I don't want to be judged or viewed differently.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then how long were you with them at that point?
So I was there for 9/11. I remember vividly being in my office. There was a lot of driving because I owned 3 or 4 different commands. So I was constantly bouncing back and forth between those commands. And I think I did 3 years there. I might have extended, it might have been 2 years and I extended a year. I think I did 3 years there. And then I deployed. The toughest thing now about then was being there during 9/11, and we spun up because nobody knew what was going to happen. We all knew we'd probably go to war, and we all obviously wanted to go do something. But I was really frustrated in the fact that we were spinning our wheels and weren't going to do anything fast enough. And when I noticed, I don't think we're going to do anything, I think we're just going to stay in this standby, then I was putting chits in. I wanted to take leave and I wanted to go to New York. My dad was a New York City firefighter. I was a New Yorker. I wanted to go and dig in a rubble pile. I wanted to feel like I was contributing in some way, shape, or form. But it was really, really hard not to. And then eventually they came to me and said, hey, listen, there's already a forward deployed unit of ours. They're going into Kuwait this week, and then they're going to be one of the first units to go. We want you to go meet up with them. So eventually I got spun up and I got to go and feel like I was, doing something in response to 9/11, but it took a few months, 3 or 4 months, whatever it was, a while.
Yeah, for all the paperwork and everything to catch up, and
or even for the military or the government or whoever to figure out how are we going to respond and what assets are we going to use and who's going to go and what will that look like. And I'm sure everybody felt that. Everybody felt the need to want to sort of do something.
Yes.
Right? And hey, I'm in service, and that called a ton of people to service. And if you're already in service, use me. I'm here. This is what I'm here for.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you get to Kuwait. What's going through your head when you first get there?
It's real. We got there pretty early, and then we were on a small little base, and then the population of that base just kept multiplying. And then the politics of it then, of paying attention to, obviously, with President Bush, are we going to go? Will we go? When we go? But mainly at that point, your focus is what are the things I need to do to get ready? What are all, what's it going to look like? And just knowing that the job that I took was these people are going to go throw their lives on the line and lay it out there. And when and if something happens, I'm the name they're going to call.
Right.
You want to have your ducks in a row. And I was also excited because I didn't, at that point, it was 10 years. My career, I tell people all the time, my career was split 10 years and a half. It was 10 years of peacetime military And I thought all I would ever do was train to do the job. I never thought I'd really get to be a combat medic. And then the next 10 years we're doing the job. You know what I mean? So it was very different. So it was a little bit of excitement of obviously wanting to potentially feel like we were responding and also wanting to get a chance to go off to war. Right? And a little bit of that is being naive. A little bit of that is not realizing the things you're going to be exposed to and the heaviness of it and the cost of it and the lives and the, you're young and you're gung ho at that point.
Yeah. So you get there, did you have an opportunity to mingle with the locals, or were you just strictly base and that's where you stayed?
Not at that point, not much. At that point, there's support staff, you know what I mean? And they're running the stores and the things, but you're not really immersed. You're not. And it was a bizarre, the lead up to it was we went and we helped one of the SEAL teams go out on an oil platform. And we did that like a day before the war kicked off. So we started a day early. We stayed out there for like 24 or 48 hours. There were Iraqi soldiers. We had intelligence that soldiers were out there and they were going to sabotage this. And it wound up being no fighting. They surrendered immediately. The SEALs kind of seized it. We were right behind them on their heels. And then in conversation with those Iraqi soldiers that we were kind of taking care of at the point, their leadership spoke English. I was like, wow, your English is great. He's like, yeah, I went to college in UCLA. I'm like, oh, that's bizarre, right? I'm like, okay. I'm like,
not expected.
Yeah, not what I expected. And then, we started talking about, he's like, listen, we have orders and we're supposed to sabotage these things, but we understand that these things belong to the Iraqi people. It's not what we intended to do. And they certainly had the capability of doing it. They had, enormous amount of firearms and firepower, but thankfully that wasn't the case. But what was interesting is like, that was like a day and a half before the war started. So we ended up getting on a small like LCAC and riding back into Kuwait onto the base. And we had been up for like, 30 hours at that point. I remember going to eat breakfast and the mood in the chow hall was just electric because finally everybody was going off to war and they're high-fiving each other. We're going to fucking war. I'm like, yeah, we already been. We just got back. It was just really peculiar. I'm like, yeah, we're done.
Right. Job complete. Check.
Yeah, pretty much. And then for me, we did one other thing. We did a rescue mission, and then I wound up getting sent back home because I was only on loan to them. They had another corpsman. So it was just like really just get in, get out. Like, it was just really surreal. It was strange, and it still didn't scratch the itch, what I felt. And that whole conflict was very short. It was, in the beginning part of it anyway, it was very, like it was.
Yeah. So what, you get back home and then what?
I get back home and then I'm close to leaving that unit. I was due to rotate, and I also right at that point had found out that I had made chief, which in the Navy is a really big deal. And you have an initiation process. And I had negotiated shore duty orders to go to a really small clinic in Virginia, right on the kind of Outer Banks, North Carolina border, out of little training command. And I was going to be the senior enlisted person at the clinic. I'd have like 20-something corpsmen. I had civilian doctors and civilian nurses, but I was the senior guy in the building. So it was going to be, interesting. And I wound up taking those orders. But in the transition piece of that, it was mostly just going through the chief's initiation process. And then I took those orders. I did that job for about a year. It was super fulfilling because it was just pure leadership. And I was also an independent duty corpsman. So I was seeing patients and running the clinic. And I had, my bosses all ran another clinic. You know what I mean? So I had some ties to the hospital and the other clinics. It was just, it was true leadership, right? I had 20-something. I think I had 26 corpsmen or something like that. I did that for a year, and then I went home on leave for Christmas. And then on that leave, they were like, hey, your number came up. You're being deployed to Iraq. You need to report January 3rd to Camp Lejeune. And here's the paperwork. Here's what you need. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And it was going to be a 13-month deployment, which it wound up being.
Wow.
So, and they were like, just be at the hospital on the 3rd and get on this bus. And I was like, what? At that point, I'm like, I'm a chief. I'm like, I'm not taking a bus to Camp Lejeune. And I knew we were going to be at Camp Lejeune for like 6 weeks training. I'm like, I'm not going to be there without a vehicle. I'm like, I'm not doing that. And a bunch of people followed those orders. I did not. I'm like, you tell me where I need to be on Camp Lejeune and I'll get there. And then I went down there and trained.
Okay. So you get your training, you end up going to Iraq. How different was Iraq from Kuwait?
It was different. It was, and again, like my other time in Iraq had only been a day or two. It was very different. And again, it was another super rewarding tour, rewarding and frustrating, because my view of it was I was really going to go to war, and the Marines were going out, and I wanted to be on the LCACs with them, and and I had really good leadership. I had a great emergency room doctor who led us. We were in a really small place. We were in a place called Korean Village, kind of almost on the border of Syria. It was a very, very small compound. We had like 40 corpsmen with us, and we had a small surgical team. And our job was to be in casualty receiving, stabilize what we took, and then fly them as quickly as we could to a bigger base. And it was a lot of training corpsmen. It was a lot of keeping their energy up, knowing we might go weeks without seeing any patients, and then knowing at any point the doors could open and we'd see 10 people, or we'd see, and start dealing with the ugliness of the war and the IEDs and the things that started happening. So, and it was a super, super rewarding and fulfilling tour for me, because we just did a lot of really good things with junior troops. And we demonstrated leadership to them, and they had come from a unit where, it took 3 months of being there with us before they even trusted us, because they just thought any leadership they had before that was terrible leadership.
Oh, wow.
Everybody was out to get them, and we worked hard to train them. We worked hard to get them their FMF qualifications. We made it mandatory. We made it mandatory for them to do voluntary service, and at the time, as a chief, they hated me for it. Why do I got to go over and help Seabees? And I'm like, you're in a community. Like, they're building buildings that we're going to live in and utilize. Or they'd have to go to the chow hall and serve food. Or they'd have to, and they, at the time, they were a little short-sighted. I'm like, you're not here to play Halo for 16 hours a day. You know what I mean? You're not here to play basketball. You're not here. You're here to support the war mission, and that's part of the mission. And our job is to take casualties when we have them. When we don't have them, we're just doing this, right? And you're going to lose your mind, and you're going to not feel like you're part of a team, and you're going to miss home even more, or do dumb stuff, or get yourself in trouble.
Right.
And then ultimately they saw why we led the way we led. And ultimately, when it came time for awards and promotions, and they were competing with people on other bases who didn't have voluntary service, and they did, then they started to see why we led the way we led. And when they went home and everybody had their qualification and everybody had all these other things, we got them all ACS certified, and all, things that they didn't have to have, but things that, certainly were going to help them from a promotional perspective.
Right.
And it was also a chance for them to see death and the ugliness of war and start to have conversations about what that looked like.
Exactly.
It's real hard to complain about how bad you've got it when, you're not the one who just lost the leg.
Right.
Right.
And so you do that for 13
I'm an E7.
months?
Yeah, for 13 months. And at that point, I'm an E7 and I'm 30 years old. And my ability to deal with it and cope with it, as tough as it is a lot different. My job is to help a 22-year-old wrap his head around this and get back to work.
And so at the end of that, what happens next for you?
So the end of that, I go back, and I have a year left at Northwest, but I find out prior to going back that they've sent somebody else out in my spot. And he was a Master Chief getting ready to retire. He lived close to that. So I was like, okay, I understand. And I got back there, and I knew pretty quickly I probably wasn't going to stay there, because it was just a weird position to be in. He was like, man, you've been gone so long. Just go play golf. Just you do it. I'm like, I can't do that. That's not me. That's not my style. That's not. And then I could see that the junior sailors were struggling, because they'd come to me for leadership answers, and I just sent them to him. And it was just a really, and right along that time, I had already been approached, even prior to that, to get a chance to go to Naval Special Warfare Development Group, to go to SEAL Team 6. So that was already sort of percolating in me. And then I knew, I'm like, I'm not going to be happy in this job. This is not the job that I signed up for. The job has changed. So I went to my leadership and said, hey, listen, I have an opportunity to go over to Dev Group, temporarily as TDY on loan. And there was nothing. Number one, they were really good to me. And number two, they'd given my job away. So certainly they were going to feel compelled to sort of. And so I remember a guy who now lives, interestingly, I live in West Virginia. He lives 45 minutes away. And he's a guy who, put me through chief selection. He was my boss at the time. I remember him asking me, what, how long, when I cut your orders for TDY, how long do you want them for? And I remember telling him it doesn't matter. And he's like, what do you mean? He's like, it matters. How long do you want to be gone? I'm like, you're going to cut me TDY orders and I'm never going to come back. And that's precisely what ended up happening. I'm like, just cut me temporary orders for 30 days or whatever. And then, within 2 weeks of being there, they did what they wanted, and I had hard copy orders. And he was like, well, what about your end of tour award? What about you? And I'm like, I don't want any of that stuff. I'm at the job I'm supposed to be at now, and I'm good. you know, and
Nice.
that was where I stayed till I retired. The last 7 years or whatever,
Wow.
6 3/4, whatever.
And so with that, where are you at today? What do you have going on today?
Yeah, I contract. I teach full time. Primarily, I teach tactical medicine. I still teach. I do teach firearms from time to time, but at the end of the day, most of what I'm teaching are lessons learned from the Iraqs and the Afghanistans. Right, the combat medicine stuff, the preparedness stuff, whether it's the firearm stuff, a lot of those things are, those last years at Dev Group, I did multiple Iraq and Afghanistan, and got to really truly be a lot of different things. You're a corpsman. HM's, the joke is it stands for handyman, but you got to solve problems, right? You got to solve medical problems. You got to solve marital problems. You got to solve, all sorts of things. Sometimes guys come to you because they can't come to anybody else, or sometimes they come to you because they trust you implicitly. And some guys need to be told it's going to be okay, and some need a kick in the ass. And so now I primarily teach. I've been teaching in the civilian sector. Most of that in the beginning was geared toward first responders, an opportunity because a lot of the lessons learned immediately needed to get to them. We needed to teach police officers and first responders. There's a better way to do medicine. There's a better way to do tactics and shooting. There's a better way. A lot of the things we've been saying and that we learned weren't right, and we've figured that out. And so it's incumbent upon us to get out there and teach them. And now that's filtered down even more to the civilian.
Right.
So now, school teachers need to know how to put a tourniquet on. School teachers need to know, unfortunately, how to stop bleeding. And frankly, it's something I think everybody knows. And it's not just because the world's a dangerous place, but because people crash
Things
cars.
happen. Yeah.
Arms go through glass. It's not always knife and gun club and active shooting. It's anything can happen at any point. So
that's right.
So I'm blessed that I can share mistakes that I've made in medicine and lessons I've learned with people on a daily basis, and that gets to be my job.
Nice. And so for those who are coming into the military, do you have any words of wisdom for them?
Yeah, I would say, I don't stay longer than you need to. You know what I mean? Like, it's not for everybody. But if you decide to, I watched a lot of guys and gals leave, and they probably left because it was hard. And I don't know that they left for the right reasons. And you can generally tell when you have that conversation. I'm going to go work for my uncle. I'm going to make $127 an hour. And I'm like, if that were an option, you probably would have done that before. You know what I mean? When you're ready, you'll know.
Right.
And if there's something else out there for you, by all means, go pursue that. But make sure you got what you came for. You know what I mean? Be present and it's no different than anything in life. Like, I was so focused for so many years of my life on getting to the next thing that I didn't enjoy where I was. And what you don't realize is there's no there. You know what I mean? All those things that you're pursuing, all those times, I just heard a guy, he said his son asked him, "Hey, Dad, is $35,000 a lot of money?" And he says, "Well, it is until you make it." Right? Because then once you make that much, you realize it's probably not a lot. Right. So
there you go. Those are good words.
You are where you are and you are who you are. So just enjoy the process of it.
That's right. So what resources are you aware of in your area?
Yeah, that's funny because the first one I'm going to mention is the one that's going to make everybody roll their eyes, but it's the VA. The VA is an interesting animal. The process is a lot better. They're working as hard as they can, but it's a big bureaucracy, and aircraft carriers don't turn on a dime. And some of being successful in that process is going to require work out of you. And a lot of us, frankly, don't either agree with that or don't want to do the work. And it's no different than anything else. If you're looking for therapy and counseling and you get a bad therapist, don't dismiss counseling. You've been to a bad restaurant before and you didn't dismiss eating out. You know what I mean? So sometimes you just went
to another one.
Yeah. And so you may not get the answer that's the right answer, and you may not get that. But honestly, it's no different in medicine in the civilian sector. You may see I had a botched ankle surgery in the civilian sector. You know what? I didn't do my due diligence and I didn't vet who my surgeon was, and even if I had, it could have gone wrong. So one, that's a significant resource. And I do a lot of men's counseling and I do a lot of men's work. on the Turn 2 project and the man camp stuff. And I cannot tell you, where I work is primarily veterans. I can't tell you how many guys and gals I talk to on a daily basis that haven't even put in their paperwork because they feel as though they're not entitled to it, or they feel as though it's stolen valor, or, well, I'm not really disabled, or I'm not, and they don't want to get these things service connected. And I'm like, it's not about that. Or they feel as though when I go to the VA, I feel like I'm being judged, or I feel like there's so many people far more worse than me. And I'm like, that's comparison. Like, comparison is the thief of joy. Like, you going getting the benefits that you're entitled to, don't take benefits away from anybody else.
Correct.
And there's something about that. There's some kind of a stigma, and there's something about that, frankly, our retirement, the pay from the retirement, it's not terrific. And some of that is supposed to have been augmented by what your disability rating is. And again, I'm not saying go take compensation for things you're not entitled to, but there's probably a fair amount of things that you are entitled to. And if nothing else, get those things service connected, because now when your back becomes a problem in 10 years, somebody needs to help you with that.
Yeah.
Don't wait until it's a problem.
It's a contract too. And I keep saying to people that, you sign a contract, it's two entities. It's yourself and it's the government.
Yep.
And if you have withheld, or upheld your end of that contract, now it is time for
Absolutely.
The government to uphold theirs.
And that money's already set aside for you. You're not taking
Correct.
that money out of the war bill. You're not taking that money out of active duty members' hands. You're not taking that money out of other service members who have disabilities either. That money's already set aside for you. And I would say, if you look at the way the government is, do you really want to give them surplus money to do what they want? What do you think they'll use it judicially? Probably not, right? Go get what's yours.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. And then the other one I would say is just, there's no shortage of organizations out there. Our suicide rates are through the roof. Our mental health is not terrific. And I think there's a struggle that you go through when you separate. And I think it's not exclusive to the military. I'm sure Derek Jeter had a struggle 3 or 4 weeks or 3 or 4 years after he retired, and he wasn't Derek Jeter anymore. Or he had to learn who Derek Jeter was when he wasn't a Yankee.
Yep.
So it's not that it's exclusive to us, but you really have to figure out what you're passionate about, and you have to figure out what your purpose is. And a job is not a purpose. A job is great, and most of us are still going to need to have jobs, but you need to I failed miserably at taking time to think about if money wasn't an object, what would I do? Asking myself important questions. What do I want the rest of my life to look like? I didn't do that. I just said, well, how much money do I need to make to take care of the current family I have? And what are my options to go do that?
Yeah.
And when life caught up with me and I didn't have the peer group accountability anymore, and I didn't have somebody telling me what color socks to wear, and when it got really hard, what I realized is I don't have any of the good and healthy habits that I had. All I've got are the bad ones. And that's when the struggles really started to set in. That's when the PTSD started. And that's when the mental health for me was bad. And I had to go and search. And there's no shortage of organizations out there. But you got to ask for help. You got to be willing to say, I'm not okay. And you got to be willing to, there are plenty of people who will meet you where you are. But
and that brings me to,
go ahead.
That brings me to Turn 2 project. Explain briefly what the Turn 2 project is.
Yeah, me and Chris and some others, when I was struggling, I knew I went looking for something and I couldn't, and it was also during COVID. So there wasn't a lot out there in terms of options. But I bit and pieced my healing together. You know what I mean? I listened to podcasts and I talked to friends and I went to therapy and I went to a place called Boulder Crest, which is incredible. And it's, completely funded by donors. It's, look it up if you're looking for a place to donate. The Boulder Crest organization is unbelievable. But I knew I wanted to be around other veterans and I wanted to be away. I wanted to camp and I wanted to do manly things and I wanted to reconnect with nature. And so when I got on the path of recovery, I just felt it incumbent on me to create the things that I went looking for that I couldn't find. And so I pitched it to Chris and said, hey, I want to go camping. And at that point, everybody was, so longing to be around other people because of COVID. It wasn't a hard sell. In fact, these guys went with me in February in Pennsylvania in 2 feet of snow. Like, you want to do what? And really what I wanted to do is I wanted to camp and I wanted to throw axes. I wanted to light stuff on fire, but I really wanted to get behind a closed door and have conversations with other veterans saying, hey, are you okay? And then they'd say, yeah, I'm fine. And then I just wouldn't take that as an answer.
Correct.
And we dig in. And really what we've created now, it's become a nonprofit. And we've got a team. We put about 70 men through the process. We do what we call man camps. And they're these 4-day intensive camps. We go up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And yeah, we do firearms training, and we teach TACMED, and we do this, we bring this executive chef in, and all that stuff's cool, but that's not what you're here for. And really what happens is we give them permission to figure out what they are there for. And we just start, like, a lot of these guys just haven't been in a place where they have permission to not be okay. And then we lead with vulnerability and transparency. And when they're exposed to that, they're a lot more comfortable being vulnerable and transparent. And almost always. And the other thing is we've gone through a couple of these other places and we've begged and borrowed and stole and taken things and go, oh, this is a great exercise. And so we do these, group exercises, and a lot of them have metaphorical representation. And, each different person gets a different thing from different exercises. We take them on hikes. We make them push themselves physically. We talk about cleaning up. We talk about eating nutrition and health. We talk about why having a routine matters. We talk about breath work and yoga. We talk about, like holding yourself accountable and having an accountability group. What are your wellness practices? What are the things you do for yourself that are non-negotiable? Because what men in particular tend to isolate. And even when we have groups that would support us, we don't want to bring our negativity to those groups because we feel like we're bringing the group down. And it's the exact opposite. That's the whole reason you're in a group.
That's right.
And the other thing that people do when they're struggling is they tell themselves, when I start feeling better, I'll go back to doing the things I enjoy. And the reality is when you start going back to doing the things you enjoy, you'll start feeling better. It's the other way around.
Yes, exactly. So let's see. Do we have any questions? If you guys out in the chats have questions for Bill, go ahead and put those out there for us and we'll get those answered. We have just a few more minutes left. So
I'm a professional educator, so I'll just answer confidently, and it won't be the right answer, but I'll shake my head in yes, and it'll sound like I know exactly what I'm talking about.
So Ron Wayne says very wise words.
Most of them are not mine, Ron. That's why.
Joe Bird said, of course, that his time there, life-changing. So that's excellent.
Yeah, Joe is one of the cadre for the Turn 2 Project and Man Camp, and he leads some of our expeditions.
Jason says, as a former firefighter, this would be good for them as well. We didn't see exactly the same stuff, but I have seen stuff I wouldn't wish on anyone. Yeah. And yeah, Joe says he fully recommends it to all men. And it sounds like, and I know Chris talked about it, of course, when he was a guest as well. And it sounds like something that, from what I'm hearing from just even those in the chats, that it has made a huge difference for them. And I think that's amazing that you're doing that and taking that time.
Yeah. And if it's not with us, there's a lot of other places doing things. You got to find out. The thing that I saw that I was a little frustrated, and there's a lot of programs out there that are kind of catch and release. Yeah. And those are great. Like there's places that'll take you hunting. That's cool. Like I personally, it's one thing I don't do well and I want to learn more of. I'd love to go participate in one of them, but I don't know that that's going to fix, or that's going to wake me up, or that's truly what I'm looking for. Like I went on a Outward Bound expedition, and they do that for veterans as well. It was terrific. We went and camped up at Leadville, Colorado at altitude with other veterans. It was a chance to connect with other vets, and it was great, but it really wasn't digging. You know what I mean? It didn't move the earth the way that I needed it to be moved. And the other thing I'll always say, my challenge collectively is to all veterans. I don't know that we collectively are doing as good a job as we all could and should be doing. And again, I'm just as complicit in that. I'm not trying to blame anybody, but I think we should be proud of the last 20 years of conflict and what we've done. And I think 20 and 40 years from now, I want to be proud of what we did after that. And I think we have an opportunity to be the next greatest generation. And I don't know that we're stepping into that. And I think if we're all waiting around for politicians and bureaucrats in the VA to fix it, I think we'll be waiting a long time. I don't think they're capable. I think we're the ones who led the charge. We're the ones who led the fight. And I think we're the ones who have to now lead the next charge and figure out what that looks like. And I think if you were to poll the civilian populace and ask them, hey, what do you think about OIF and OEF veterans? Like what foot are they putting forward? And I think it's a lot of the suicide rate's going to come up, right? Is that, and a lot of the jokes, which is cool. Like I own the same t-shirts you do that say whiskey helps or disgruntled veteran or, I'm a veteran, wind me up and point me, and that's all humorous and I get it, but I don't know that, is that really how we want to be portrayed? Is that really the best of us, right? Is that
Right.
because I think a lot of us are out there doing a lot of really, really good things. And I think we need to find ways to celebrate each other more and really put that on the forefront more.
Right. So Ron Wayne has a question, and that is, what moment stands out to you the most during your military service, or funny moment?
Moment, that's hard. I spent a lot of years in SEAL teams. There's a lot of funny moments. I can give you one quick one. My mom is known for incessantly calling. And I don't mean just calling you all the time. I mean, if she calls you and you don't answer, like if you were to call me, Carolee, and I send you to voicemail, you probably would assume I would call you back. My mom will just call you again and call you again and then call you again and then call you. And I'm and anybody else that were to do that, you'd answer and go, oh my God, this must be emergent. She's like, no, I just wanted to talk. And I'm like, no. So I remember being at an award ceremony, and this is when cell phones were relatively new on the scene or whatever. And I'm literally at attention, getting the award from my commanding officer, and my phone in my pocket rings. And I'm like mortified. So I reach down and I put it on vibrate or whatever. And don't you know, like 10 seconds later, it rings again. And I can't get it, like I can't switch it fully to vibrate. I can just hit the button to make it stop ringing. And of course, it's my mother. And so she calls like 4 times. And finally, my CEO's like, Doc, do you need to take that? I'm like, no, sir, I don't. And I know who it is at this point, because who else would call me 7 times, and then when I finally get her on the phone and I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, you were getting an award. Why didn't you tell me? I would have came. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, I didn't know I was getting an award. I'm like, I didn't know. If I'd known, I would have put the camera somewhere, the phone somewhere else. So
that's funny.
That's an easy one. Yeah.
Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, but I want to say thank you, Bill, very much for your sacrifice, your service, and your continuing service to the veterans that are out there. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
If you want to hang tight for me, I'm going to go ahead and get this wrapped up. So everybody, please have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, or what's left of it. And then let's see, next Sunday, we do have a guest scheduled. So please check out Facebook, Conversations with a Vet, and for confirmation on that. And if hopefully we will have everybody here next week. So again, thank you. And y'all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your evening.